who was an adult in the room that maybe has some experience here that we would expect to say, maybe we don't do that.
Yeah,
I'd
say his Treasury pick, Scott Bessent.
Okay. Tell me about Scott Bessent.
All right. So, a lot of people in the Trump administration are huge Trumpers. They're notorious Republicans or even not Republicans, just very, very big Trump supporters. Scott Bessent, probably you would look at him and be like, oh, he's just another gray-haired old white guy that is for Trump. And that he may be a Trump supporter, but he's at the end of the day, he has been with everybody. And so a little backstory on him is we've all heard George Soros, right? Everybody knows who George Soros is, regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, notorious for funding liberal and democratic campaigns and all of that. Soros made a ton
Depending on where you're at on Reddit, he's done other things too that are a bit nefarious.
Yeah. You can, the 4chan, you can go down a lot of rabbit holes on Soros. But regardless, he made in 1982, his firm made a huge bet against the British pound. Long story short, his firm figured out that they were doing some shady stuff and kind of propping up their own valuation. And so he took a short against it and made like $1 billion in a single night in 1992.
Nice. We've all been there.
Yeah. Scott Bessent was his right-hand man that did that. He was the one who called it. He was the one that was right there lockstep with Soros and worked for Soros. And then when Scott Bessent left Soros's firm, Soros was the one who funded Bessent's new firm. So this guy, yeah, he does work for the Trump administration, for sure. But regardless, he also was BFFs, or at least incredibly close colleagues to one of the most notorious Democratic funders ever. So I'll start there. But this guy knows currency and he knows debt very well. He knows big picture economics in terms of a country's debt.
Macro.
Yeah,
a
country's debt
to macroeconomics.
There you go. Yeah, so he knows countries, he knows debt, he knows currencies and macro points, right? Very well. One of the reasons I think that Trump brought, whether you think Trump's smart or you think he's an absolute moron, regardless, he was brought in. And I do think he is incredibly smart at what he was brought in to do. And so if you take a step back and strip away tariffs, and we'll get to where tariffs plug into this, you take a step back, you look at America right now, right? We printed a ton of money in the last administration, printed a ton of money in Trump's administration. We've essentially been racking up infinite debt over the years. We don't just get it for free, right? Because of the Treasury bonds and the rates that are out there, we have to pay back that debt. And so we're at the point now where our debt is so high and the rates are so high that our debt payments are bigger. The debt payments are bigger than what we're bringing in. Is kind of the best way to look at it.
Okay.
So it's an impossibly sustainable route, right?
Yep.
And the only option is take on even more debt to pay your debt, which obviously, would have Dave Ramsey freaking out, right?
Yep.
Or change things, right? You make more money. That takes a while. You drop the rates, but the Fed's not going to do that because they have a mandate, and they don't. If inflation's up here and it hasn't gone down, they're not dropping rates.
A mandate by Congress?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you can't force the Fed to drop rates to then refinance your debt at a cheaper rate and pay less money. So there's certain things, or you can cut waste, right? You can, what they're trying to do with Doge and Elon and all that, trying to cut the waste. That's one way you can make more money.
Trim expenses, yeah.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, the debt payment is the issue. And so when I mentioned earlier that, how could you expect it if Bessent, and it's a big if, right? If he did know what he was doing and kind of saw this, then he probably looked at three things and said, these are the three things that we can do to turn things around. One, prevent a massive market crash because of all these debt payments and the skyrocketing government debt. That could put a lot of pressure on American companies, could put a lot of pressure on the dollar, and which then obviously puts a lot of pressure on banks and hedge funds and all that, who, as we mentioned, are levered to the tits.
Yep.
Huge leverage. There's a ton of pressure there. If that crashes, we're screwed. So number one, get them to kind of de-lever themselves and get back to balance on Wall Street. Number two is our own dollar and the rate that we're paying for the debt. We got to get that lower. We have to refinance that somehow and get rates down. And then number two is China and how they are in a fairly weak position right now in their own economy, yet a ton of other countries have put a lot of investment into that. So if he's looking at that, what do? I know Trump wants to tariff the ever-living shit out of people. So what if my goal is to let him do it and say, this is a great idea, with China being really the only focus, right? So let Trump do whatever he wants. But if I can convince him that like China's the only focus, let's strip everything else away, then we'll go out, we'll launch tariffs on every single country, and that'll get people to the drawing board and make Trump happy. Then he comes around and says, well, these people are at the table negotiating our tariffs and all that. We're going to keep China's tariffs, but everybody else's tariffs, we're going to kind of pause and we'll work with them. That's going to cause Wall Street to sell, right? They're going to de-lever their positions, just like I talked about, that 100-to-1 in treasuries. They're going to say, oh shit, I got to sell these. We're going to keep some cash on hand, right? And that's what we saw. Stock market plummets. Everybody on Wall Street pulls out money. They're holding cash and cash equivalents and things like that. Check. Number two, crush China's economy. First, they obviously have to sell our treasuries. They sell our treasuries. They get crushed over time with the tariffs. We survive. And then the reciprocal action of that is the Chinese currency will drop and people will fly to a safer option, which is the U.S. Treasury bills.
Yeah.
Which then lowers rates. We refinance the trillions of debt that we have. And there we go.
Back in business.
Back in business.
And you think that's Bessent's kind of strategy, or at least what he wanted to try and do?